In this video, we're going to be covering views. And views contain rows and columns just like a real table, but instead of having static data behind them, they're actually made up of other tables. Essentially, anytime you write a select statement, and there are a few limitations on this, you can't do certain subqueries with it, but you can write a select statement joining multiple tables together and then save it permanently on the database. When I mean permanent, I mean like a table. It can be available for anyone to use. So here's an example where I'm selecting a user ID, a first name, a last name, a username, a date of birth, status and type, again, not the IDs, but the actual text, status and type, the created date, and then I'm creating a column here called full name. In order to get all these columns, I'm joining in the users, the user status, and the user type tables, and joining them on their IDs. And if I run that, I get the expected results, 175,369 rows, and the columns that we requested. Now, if I'm running this often, meaning I'm selecting this quite a bit, what I would do is put the words create view, give it a name, as, and write a select statement. And if you run this, you only get to run it once, and we may have to refresh over on the left here, but what you'll see is now we have a view, and it looks like a table, but it is a little different in color. Give that a click and go to content, and this view now contains the same rows as that query we selected, including that full name. Now, the definition behind the view, if you click on table info, is still the select statement. There is no real data behind it, meaning if you notice, the size and all this information are blank. And the reason is it actually doesn't have any rows. It's running this select statement each time you select from the view in order to compose the data. You can select it just like a normal table. So if I say select star from user view, here are all our columns. And it can be treated just like a regular table. There's a few reasons we do this. One, it's a lot easier or convenient to run this statement as opposed to running this. Obviously, it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot nicer. However, when you do create the view and it's over here on the left, it's as permanent as a table. So if you ever go to a database and there are more views than tables, it may be a hint that there's a problem. I usually use views fairly sparingly. I shouldn't have hundreds and hundreds of views. But there's also another benefit to having a view. If you noticed in this table, I selected the username, but I left out the password. And instead of selecting the IDs, I selected the active and the actual text, the names behind it. Views, we don't talk a whole lot about permissions in this course, but you can give someone login permission to your database and have them have access to the view and not the table. This allows you to hide columns. Like I may let someone log in and let someone have access to user view, but not the user table. Well, in that case, they don't have access to the password. And that's something I would never I would never share or let anyone see. Preferably in or outside of your company, you always want to hide something like a password. But the point is you can do that for any columns you want. And these can get a little complex. Now, by default, they are, well, in MySQL, they are updatable. What I mean is if I go to users and I say Colt Trinks is now Colt Trinks Jr., and then we go back to the view, what you'll see is there is Colt Trinks Jr. So each time you select the view, it does run the query. But it is updatable, meaning it's not Junior. We'll name him now the 3rd. And I change it in the view, and if we go back to the table, you notice it updated there. By default, they're updatable for simple joins. What I mean is, if I created a view based on like some type of aggregate function where I'm getting a count of emails for users, and I just happen to update their count from 3 to 4 emails, a new email doesn't spontaneously generate. So that would not be an updatable column. But when you're doing a simple join like this, by default in MySQL, they are updatable. In Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle, they are read-only. So that's a big difference between MySQL and the other databases. One more thing we can do is move between a view and an inline view. Just like scalar subqueries are interchangeable with functions, views and inline views are interchangeable. So I want to go back to an example we worked on where I was showing you how to write an inline view. And we were selecting, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and just limit this to the first 1,000 rows. And here we're selecting the user ID, the first name, the last name, and the order count. Well, these fields are all coming from the users table. This field called order count is coming from this inline view, which we call OC. We're going to left join users and OC on the user ID. That's why a lot of them are nulls, but if we keep scrolling down, we will find people who do have, sorry, these aren't emails again, these are orders. However, we can take this query and create a view out of it. Meaning, I'm going to say create a view called order count as, and this is the same thing I have up here. Let's make it a little larger so you can see this. This query I'm creating the view on is the same as what's between the parentheses over here. So now when I run it, we now have a new view here called order count, which has that information as far as user IDs and their order count. Okay, what's the big benefit to this? Well, if I created a view named user order count as this, I could technically get rid of this, as I did here, and call it user order count, because this represents the entire query. So a view and an inline view are interchangeable. Now, if I ran this and got 1,000 rows, I'm going to go ahead and do the same join. And what we'll get back are those exact same results. Again, because we're running the same query, we're just referencing it differently. Here, we're using a view, which I created here. This is an inline view. Now, let's see here. Again, the big benefits of the views: make your queries a little easier, make them a little cleaner. Definitely security reasons are a way of limiting access to certain columns or perhaps certain data. There is a slight performance boost for using a view, just because a view can become cached, but it all depends on the situation. But again, the big ones are it makes it easier to query, and it definitely makes it more secure.